Hi all, welcome to Just Talks. So in this video, I'll be discussing about personality, mainly personality disorders. It will be useful for students. So let's begin the class. So firstly, what is personality disorder? It is defined as inflexible and maladaptive patterns of behavior. So when there is a abnormal kind of behavior or inflexible patterns of behavior, then we call it as personality disorders. So they are pervasive and persistent, inflexible, maladaptive patterns of behavior that deviate from expected cultural norms. So we have some expectation about how a normal person will be. So when the person deviates from that normality, that is where we say maladaptive pattern of behavior. Okay, so then what happens is that they cause significant distress or functional impairment, and diagnosis is clinical treatment is with psychotherapy and sometimes drug therapy. So clinically, when it is diagnosed, treatment will be psychotherapy and drugs will also be used. So personality disorder as defined in the DSM-4, it is like this. It is an enduring and inflexible pattern of long duration leading to significant distress or impairment, and is not due to use of substances or another medical condition. So basically, personality disorder means it is like inflexible behavior, like I told you, where the person feels distress, or the person is not able to, do his or her activities like before. But it is not due to the use of substances or any other medical condition. Then only we can say that it is a personality disorder. It is a long-standing and maladaptive pattern of perceiving and responding to other people and to stressful circumstances. So it is a long-standing disorder. So 10 personality disorders are there, and it is grouped into three clusters. So let's see an overview of human personality. So, what is personality? It is the dynamic organization within the individual of those psychophysical systems that determine his characteristics, behavior, and thought. So, this is Alport. He is the one who introduced this definition of personality. So, it is like personality means it is a person's characteristic, behavior, thought that he or she is developed through their surroundings. Okay, it is a dynamic organization. That means it is a changing organization. So personality forms during childhood, and it is shaped through an interaction of two factors. So our personality is formed mainly in childhood, but as we develop or as we grow, it is modified or shaped. So mainly there are two factors which affect our personality, that is inherited tendencies or genes. So inherited means from our parents, grandparents. Okay, so that from there also our personality can be shaped. So these are aspects of your personality passed on to you by your parents, such as if your parents are shy, or if they have or if they're having a happy outlook. So sometimes that characteristics may pass on to their children. So this is sometimes, all these are sometimes called as temperament. Okay, it is the nature part of the nature versus nurture. Next factor is environment or your life situations. So wherever we are living, that surroundings or that environment, also it also becomes a feature or a factor to change our personality. So this is the surroundings you grew up in, events that occurred, and relationships with family members and others. It includes such things as the type of parenting you had, whether loving or abusive. So as in it includes everything, like your interaction with your family, or your relationship with your family, with your neighborhood, or what type of parenting you are getting, whether your parents are very loving or abusive. So all this depends upon how your personality is being shaped or modified. All these factors affect your personality. So next we'll see personality development and theories. So personality development has been a major topic of interest for some of the most prominent thinkers, especially in psychology, and also of great concern for psychiatrists in that understanding how and why we become what we are is some of the basic core principles. So personality means it was a major interesting topic for most of the psychologists and psychiatrists. They wanted to know how and why a person is why we become what we are is one of the basic core principle and tools used in psychiatry for diagnosis. So our personality makes us unique. So the following theories focus on various aspects of personality development. So we have different, personality theories that were introduced by different psychologists. So these personality developments include cognitive, social, and moral development. Some psychologists speaks about cognitive, some speaks about social, and some about moral development. So we have Piaget's stages of cognitive development, where he focused mainly on cognition, thinking, and all. Next, we have Freud's stages of psychosexual development. Then we have Freud's itself. He also introduced the model of personality. Then we have Erickson's stages of psychosocial development, and then last Kohlberg's stages of moral development. So we'll be seeing each of these theories separately. Okay. So first is Piaget's stages of cognitive development. So in this, while many aspects of his theory have not stood the test of time, so his theory was like it was not accepted by many of them. But the central idea was that children think differently than adults. That was his main central idea. So in his theory, it describes mainly about the cognitive development of children. What he said was that cognitive development involves changes in cognitive processes and abilities, mainly thinking, memory, all these things. So that is what he mainly stressed upon. So, in his view, early cognitive development involves processes based upon actions and later progresses into changes in mental operations. So this was his main idea about this theory. So he also introduced some of the key concepts. Let's see what are these. So first one was schemas. So schemas means it describes both the mental and physical actions. Okay, it involves in understanding and knowing certain things. So schemas means these are categories of knowledge that help us to interpret and understand the world. So schemas means it's a knowledge, so that helps us to understand the world. So in his view, a schema includes both the category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. Okay. As experiences happen, this new information is used to modify, add to, or change previously existing schemas. So schemas means it's a category of knowledge. So whatever schemas we have, it can be changed or modified. Like for example, I'll tell you an example. There is a child. The child have a schema about a type of animal such as a dog or a cat. Okay. So if the child's experience was with a small dog, so this may be the first time the child is seeing a dog. So the child saw a small dog. So the child will believe that all dogs are small. Okay. And all dogs will have four legs. It is furry. So suppose then afterwards that then the child sees a very large dog. So he or she, the child, changes his or her schema, and they modifies it. Like dogs can be small and big also. It is not necessary that all dogs are small. So child will take in this new information, that is the new information is the dog is large, modifying the previously existing schema to include this new information. Okay, that is about schema. Next is assimilation. So let's see what is assimilation. The process of taking in new information into our previously existing schemas is known as assimilation. So we have already existing schemas. We have some knowledge about a particular thing. So when we take in new information, okay, we are taking new information to our already existing schema. That is known as assimilation. So the process is somewhat subjective because we tend to modify experience or information somewhat to fit in with our pre-existing beliefs. So it is subjective, means person to person it changes, because we tend to modify our experiences, each person's experiences or information. What is what is able to fit into our pre-existing, means already existing schemas. So in the example above, seeing a dog and labeling it dog is an example of assimilating the animal into child's dog schema. Okay. So next is accommodation. Accommodation means it's another part of adaptation. It involves changing or altering our existing schemas in the light of new information. So accommodation means it is like changing or altering whatever schemas we have. We either we change it or modify, okay, in the presence of new information. When we get any new information, we either changes it or modifies it. Okay, that is accommodation. Should not get confused with assimilation. Assimilation means new information is taken in, but accommodation means to your existing schemas you are just modifying it or changing it. Okay. So, accommodation involves altering existing schemas or ideas as a result of new information or new experiences. Like whenever you get new information or whenever you experience a new thing, you change your existing schemas. You just modify it. Okay, there is nothing new coming in. You just modify what was there in your existing schemas. So, new schemas may also be developed during this process. So next is equilibration. So let's see what is equilibration. Piaget believed that all children try to strike a balance between assimilation and accommodation, which is achieved through a mechanism which Piaget named it as equilibration. Equilibrium means a balance. So, as children progress through the stages of cognitive development, it is important to maintain a balance between applying previous knowledge and changing behavior to account for new knowledge. So, according to Piaget, what he said was that when the child is passing through different stages of cognitive development, it is very important for the child to balance between their previous knowledge and new knowledge. Okay, that is what is called equilibration. So it helps to explain how children are able to move from one stage to next stage. So that is about equilibration. So he mainly introduced three key concepts. Okay, that is first one was schemas, second is assimilation, third accumulation, accommodation, and equilibration. So mainly, sorry, four. So next we'll see if that was about Piaget. So mainly he stressed about all these four key concepts. Next we'll see what we Freud has to say about his theory. So his theory is psychosexual development. Okay, so he suggested that personality develops in stages that are related to specific erogenous zones. So according to him, it personality is developed in different stages. So failure to successfully complete these stages, he suggested that would lead to personality problems in adulthood. So when, okay, according to him, there are different stages for developing our personality. So if a person fails to successfully complete one stage, that means there will be a problem in his or her adulthood. So according to him, we need to successfully complete each stages, then only our personality will be developed. So, according to his theory of psychosexual development, it is one of the best known, but also one of the most controversial theory. Okay, so he believed that personality develops through a series of childhood stages. Okay, during which pleasure seeking energize of the it become focused on certain erogenous areas. So, according to him, it's a personality development starts from childhood stages. Okay, this psychosexual energy or libido. psychosexual energy is called libido. It was described as the driving force behind behavior. If these psychosexual stages are completed successfully, the result is a healthy personality. Otherwise, if the person failed to successfully complete each stage, he or she may develop the problems in adulthood. So, if certain issues are not resolved at the appropriate stage, fixation can occur. So, even if in one stage the person is not able to resolve some problems, so fixation can occur. It is fixation is a persistent focus on an earlier psychosexual stage. Okay, until this conflict is resolved, the individual will remain stuck in this stage. So every stage has to be successfully completed. If we do not complete the previous stage, we become stuck. We will be stuck in that stage, and our personality will not be developed properly. So, for example, a person who's fixated at the oral stage, okay, there are different stages. So, if a person is fixated at the oral stage, he or she may be over dependent on others and may seek oral stimulation through smoking or drinking. So, if a person fails to successfully complete this stage, according to Freud, what he said was that the person will become over dependent on others, or else he will, he will have these habits of smoking and drinking. So we'll see what are the different stages. So first one is oral stage. So the main pleasure seeking area is mouth. So the age ranges birth to 1 year. So rooting and sucking reflex is especially important. So mouth means sucking reflexes. So the primary conflict at this stage is weaning process. The child must become less dependent upon caregivers. If fixation occurs at this stage, Freud believed the individual would have issues with dependency or aggression. So, if the if the child is not able to complete the stage properly, the in his or her adulthood, the person will become more dependent or aggressive behavior will be there. It can also result in drinking, eating, smoking, nail biting, all this kind of behavior also. So that is about first stage. Okay. So second stage is anal stage. Anal stage, the erogenous zone is bowel and bladder control. So the age limit is 1 to 3 years. So primary focus is of libido, was on controlling bladder and bowel movements. The major conflict at this stage is the toilet training. So major, what to say? Yeah, major conflict was toilet training. So the child has to learn to control his or her bodily needs. Okay, mainly about controlling his or her bladder control. So, developing this control leads to a sense of accomplishment and independence. So, according to Freud, he believed that positive experiences during this stage served as the basis for people to become competent, productive, and creative adults. So, according to him, he believed that the person who accomplishes this can become competent, he becomes productive, and also creative person. If parents take an approach that is too lenient, okay, when the parents become too lenient, what happens is that an anal expulsive personality could develop, in which the individual has a messy, wasteful, or destructive personality. So, when the parent is very lenient, or the parent is not much, you know, not much serious about all these things, what happens is that the child may become messy or destructive personality will be developed. So if parents are too strict also or begin toilet training too early, an anal retentive personality develops. So we should not be parents should not be very lenient and they should not be too strict also. So next stage is the phallic stage. Phallic stage, the erogenous part is genitals. So 3 to 6 years, all this age sorry, at this age, children also begin to discover the differences between males and females. So at 3 to 6 years, at this age, children begins to understand, okay, there are two kinds of humans like males and females. Eventually the child begins to identify with the same sex parent as a means of vicariously possessing the other parent. Okay? That is about phallic stage. Next stage is the latent stage. So the heterogeneous zone is sexual feelings inactive are inactive. Sexual feelings are inactive. So 6 to puberty, 6 years to puberty, that is the age range. So libido interests are suppressed. The development of ego and superego contribute to this period of time. The stage begins around the time that children enter into school. So this is the time where child enters into school and become more concerned with pure relationships, hobbies. They have this relation. They try to understand what are relationship, their hobbies, their interests. So at this stage, all this develops. So latent period is a time of exploration in which the sexual energy is still present, but it is directed into other areas such as intellectual pursuits. So their sexual energy is still present, but then that is directed into different areas like social interactions. Okay, that energy is used for other purposes. This stage is important in the development of social communication skills and self-confidence. So the stage is also very important according to Freud. So last stage is genital stage, that is where maturing sexual interest. So this is from puberty to until death. So the individual develops a strong sexual interest in the opposite sex, where in the earlier stages the focus was solely on the individual needs. So in earlier stages and all, it was purely upon the individual's interest, in needs, welfare of others during this stage if the other stages have been completed successfully. So even if only if the other stages are completed successfully, the person reaches, the next stages. Then only if a person complete on only these, successfully when the person completes all the stages according to Freud, the person can develop a healthy personality. So now we are evaluating Freud's psychosexual states theory. The theory is focused almost entirely on male development. Okay, so he mainly focused upon male development and with little mention about female psychosexual development. His theories are difficult to test scientifically. Concepts such as libido are impossible to measure. So yes, we cannot test what he has said scientifically and therefore cannot be tested. The research that has been conducted tends to discredit Freud's theory. Future predictions are too vague. It is not clear also whatever he has said. How can we know that a current behavior was caused specifically by a childhood experience? Yes, that is true. How, according to him, what he said was that because of the childhood experience, the person has developed so and so behavior. So how much we can, predict that it's because of the childhood experience the person has become like this. The length of time between the cause and the effect is too long to assume that there is a relationship between the two variables. So his theory is based upon case studies and not empirical research. Also, Freud based his theory on the recollections of his adult patients, not on actual observation and study of children. So this is about his evaluate psychosexual states theory. Now next we are going to talk about is structural model of personality. Okay, he has given mainly three things, three elements to the personality. According to him, personality means there are three major elements. So according to him, personality is composed of three elements. So the three elements are id, ego, and the superego. And all these work together to create complex human behaviors. So let's see what is id. Id is the only component of personality that is present from birth. So this is the only element that is present from birth onwards. This aspect of personality is entirely unconscious. Okay, and it includes instinctive and primitive behaviors. So, according to him, it is the source of all psychic energy, making it the primary component of personality. So, according to him, it is the psychic energy and it is the primary component of personality. So it is driven by the pleasure principle, whatever pleasures we have. So that is what is driven by the it, which tries for immediate gratification, whatever needs, whatever interest we have. So that interest is gratified by if. If these needs are not satisfied immediately, the result is state anxiety or tension. So if we want something or if we desires for something and we are not able to get that, so what happens is that we show what kind of behaviors, anxiety or tension, all these things, or anger. So for example, an increase in hunger or thirst should produce an immediate attempt to eat or drink. Okay, so it is very important early in life because it ensures that an infant's needs are met. If the infant is hungry or uncomfortable, what will he or she do? He or she will cry until the demand is met. So that is how it works. So next we'll see how does ego works. Okay, ego is also the component of personality and it is responsible for dealing with reality. So it is more about dealing with reality. So according to him, ego develops from id and ensures that the impulses of id can be expressed in a manner acceptable in the real world. So id and ego works together. So whatever it means, what our pleasure behaviors. So whatever things we desires for, ego will see whether it is acceptable in the real world. Then only we can accomplish that. So ego functions in both conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious mind. But it works in unconscious mind. Ego works in all the conscious minds like conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious minds. The ego operates based on the reality principle. Ego is mainly about the reality, which tries to satisfy its desires in realistic and socially appropriate ways. The reality principle weighs the costs and benefits of an action before deciding to act upon or abandon impulses. In many cases, its impulses can be satisfied through a process of delayed gratification. The ego will eventually allow the behavior, but only in the appropriate time and place. So whatever desires or whatever interest we have, that is it, we have, ego will see whether this is the appropriate time or whether this is the appropriate place to satisfy the things, or all these things ego will see. Then only our needs are satisfied. The ego also discharges tension created by unmet impulses through the secondary process, in which the ego tries to find an object in the real world that matches the mental image created by its primary process. That is about ego. So it means it works in unconscious mind. That is, it is a pleasurable principle, and ego means it works in reality. It works in conscious, pre-conscious, and unconscious minds. Next, the last one is the superego. So it is the last component of personality to develop is the superego. The superego is the aspect of personality that holds all of our internalized moral standards and ideals. So, superego means it is about moral standards and ideals that we acquire from parents, both from parents and society. Okay, from sense of right and wrong. So superego is mainly about our moral standards, like whether this is right, whether this is wrong. So whatever knowledge we have got from our parents, society, or the environment. So mainly that is what a superego is dealing with. So see, superego provides the guidelines for making judgments. So finally, the judgment is made by the superego. So according to Freud, the superego begins to emerge at around age 5. So only at age 5, then at age 5, the superego begins to work. So next we are going to talk about, there are two parts of the superego. Okay, so let's see what are the two parts. So the first is ego ideal. It mainly includes the rules and standards for good behaviors. Okay, these behaviors include those which are approved by parental and other authority figures. So ego ideal it mainly means for a good behavior, or for a good person, what all things is needed, and that is approved by either parent or the society or the authority figures. So obeying these rules leads to feelings of pride, value, and accomplishment. So that is ego ideal. And the next is co- conscience. It includes information about things that are viewed as bad by parents and society. So this includes things that are not accepted by parents and society. So these behaviors are often forbidden and lead to bad consequences, punishments, or feelings of guilt and remorse. So these behaviors means it leads to punishments or feeling of guilt, bad consequences. Okay, that is what is this. Now, superego acts to perfect and civilize our behavior. It works to suppress all unacceptable urges of the id and struggles to make the ego act upon idealistic standards rather than upon realistic principles. So, see, superego always tries to make a person a perfect one. Okay, the superego, what the superego does is that it always suppresses what is, it will be having lots of urges. We will be having lots of urges. So, not if our urges are not acceptable urges. So, what a superego does is that it suppresses all those ones, and it always struggles to make the ego act. Why? Because ego means it works on a realistic principle. Okay, so superego is present in the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious. So now we'll see how all the three are interacted. So interaction of id, ego, and superego. With so many competing forces, it is easy to see how conflict might arise between the id, ego, and superego. So there might conflict also arise between all the three forces. So Freud used the term ego strength to refer to the ego's ability to function despite these dueling forces. A person with good ego strength is able to effectively manage these pressures. So, if a person is having a very good ego, so he will be able to handle whatever pressure comes into his life. While those with too much or too little ego strength can become too unyielding or too disruptive. So, according to him, the key to a healthy personality is that there should be a balance between hit, ego, and superego. Then only a person will have a healthy personality. When there is a conflict, mean the person won't have a healthy personality. Next, we are going to see Erickson's psychosocial development. So let's see what does Erickson has to say about this theory. So he describes the impact of social experiences across the whole lifespan. So according to Erickson, he mainly stresses on the social experiences throughout the person's life. So one of the main elements of Erickson's psychosocial theory is that ego identity, the development of ego identity. That is the main element of his theory. So, ego identity means it is the conscious sense of self that we develop through social interaction. So, what is ego identity? It is the conscious self of oneself, and that is developed through social interactions. So, according to Erickson, ego identity is constantly changing due to new experiences and information and we acquire in our daily life interactions with others. So, according to him, our ego identity will be changing continuously, like according to the new experiences we are having or the informations we get, through our daily interaction with others, with our friends, family, neighbors. So, with all these interactions, our ego continuously changes. So, in addition to ego identity, Erickson also believed that a sense of competence motivates behaviors and action. So apart from this, he also believed that there is another thing that is motivating our behaviors and action. So if the stage is handled well, so if a person is able to handle the stage very well, the person will feel a sense of mastery, which is sometimes referred to as ego strength or ego quality. If the stage is managed poorly, the person will emerge with a sense of inadequacy. So, in each stage, Erickson believed people experience a conflict that serves as a turning point in development. So, according to him, he believes that people experience conflict in each stage, but then it becomes a turning point in development. In his view, These conflicts are centered on either developing a psychological quality or failing to develop that quality. So when there is a conflict, either they develop a good quality or psychologically good quality, or they fail to develop that quality. So during this time, the potential for personal growth is high, but so is the potential for failure. So now let's see what are the stages of development according to Erickson. So the first stage is trust versus mistrust. So this occurs between birth, from birth to 1 year of age, and is most fundamental stage of life. So because an infant is utterly dependent, the development of trust is based on the dependability and quality of the child's caregiver. So a child develops trust. So according to him, the child, the age ranges from birth to 1 year. So birth means that birth to 1 year in the sense that that is a very small infant. So how does an infant develops trust from their from his or her caregivers or the parents? If a child successfully develops trust, he or she will feel safe and secure in the world. Okay, so caregivers are inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or rejecting. Okay, so if the caregivers are not taking care of the baby properly, so the child will develop mistrust in childhood. Failure to develop trust will result in fear and belief that the world is inconsistent and unpredictable. Okay, so when the trust is not developed properly, the result is fear, and the child will have a belief that the world is unpredictable or inconsistent. So the next stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt. So this takes place during early childhood, and it is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control. Like Freud, the same thing. Like in Freud's, we talked about toilet training in the second stage, right? So the same thing. The Erickson also believed that toilet training is an important part of this process. How Erickson's reasoning was that it was a bit different from what Freud told. So according to him, he believed that learning to control one's bodily functions leads to control feelings. So, according to Erickson, if a person is able to control his or her bodily functions, that then it leads to what the person is able to control his or her feelings, and a person develops a sense of independence also. So, other important events include gaining more control over food choices, toy preferences, clothing selection. Okay, children who successfully complete this stage feel secure and confident, while those who do not feel inadequacy and self doubt. Next stage is initiative versus guilt. So during the preschool years, children begin to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interactions. So this is when the child goes to the school, where the child learns about playing other social interactions. That is what is about this stage. So children who successfully complete this stage, they feel capable and able to lead others. Okay, but those who fails to complete this stage successfully, they feel a sense of guilt, they doubt themselves, and lack of initiative. Then comes the fourth stage. Fourth stage is industry versus inferiority. This stage covers the early school years from approximately 5 years to 11 years. Okay, through social interaction, children begin to develop a sense of pride in their accomplishments and abilities. So, children who are encouraged and commended by parents and teachers develop a feeling of competence and belief in their skills. So, those children who are, more who gets more encouragement and praises from their parents, teachers, or from the society, they develops a feeling of belief in their skills. Okay, they develop a kind of self confidence in their talents or skills. And whereas when those kids who receive little or when there is no encouragement from parents, friends or peers, they will have doubt about their abilities, whether they will become successful, whatever they do, whether whether I have got talent, whether I have any abilities. So all this develops. So next stage is identity versus role confusion. So this is mainly in adolescent age. So children explore their independence and develop a sense of self. So those who receive proper encouragement and reinforcement through personal exploration will emerge from this stage with a strong sense of self and feeling of independence and control. Okay, so when the child receives proper encouragement or praises and reinforcement, so the child will develop a strong sense of self and independence and control over their feelings. But those who remain unsure of their beliefs and desires will feel insecure and confused about themselves and the future. So those who doesn't get all the proper encouragements and all, they, their identity becomes confused. They do not know what they are, what their future will become. They always feel some kind of insecurity. So the sixth stage is intimacy versus isolation. So this stage covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring personal relationships. So this is more of intimate relationships. So according to him, it is the most important stage where people develop close, committed relationship with other people. Okay, so those who are successful, they will form good relationships, they become committed and secure. But remember that each step builds on skill learned in previous steps. So in each stages, the person develops a skill. Erickson believed that a strong sense of personal identity was important for developing. Okay, yeah. So according to him, he believed that a person should have a strong personal identity about themselves. Then only they can have a intimate relationship. So studies have demonstrated that those with a poor sense of self tend to have less committed relationship. So when the person is having a poor sense of self about themselves, they have less committed relationships, and also they suffer mostly from emotional isolation. They become lonely and depressed also. So next stage is generosity generativity versus stagnation. That is the seventh stage. So this is in adulthood. We continue to build our lives focusing on our career and family. So those who become successful will feel that they are contributing to the world, they're doing something to the world, they become active in their home as well as in the community. But those who fail to attain this will feel unproductive, uninvolved in the world. They feel that they are not doing anything to the world, and they feel that they are not involved, they are not being part of the world also. So the last stage is the integrity versus despair. So this phase occurs in the old age and is focused on reflecting back on life. So this is mainly about reflecting back, like what we have done in our life, how our life was. Okay, so those who are unsuccessful will feel that their life was wasted and will experience more of regrets. So the individual will be left with feeling of bitterness and despair. So those who feel proud of their accomplishment will feel a sense of integrity. So these are the eight stages of psychosocial stages, which was said by Erickson. So next comes our Kohlberg's stages. So let's see what he has to say about personality. He is the one who modified and expanded upon Jean Piaget's work to form a theory that explained the development of moral reasoning. So he is the one who expanded Piaget's work, and he explained more of moral reasoning. So Piaget describes two-stage process of moral development, while this person, that is Kohlberg's theory, he outlines six stages within three different levels. So according to him, he extended Piaget's theory, proposing that moral development is the continual process that occurs throughout lifespan. So according to him, moral development is it is a continuous process. It occurs throughout our lifespan. So the first level is pre-conventional morality. Okay, in this there is first stage. So first stage is obedience and punishment. The earliest stage of moral development is especially common in young children. So this is the earliest development. So this is common in young children. But adults are also capable of expressing this type of reasoning. At this stage, children see rules as fixed and absolute. Obeying the rules is important because it means to avoid punishments. So according to children, rules are fixed, and for according to them, if we do not follow the rules, we will be punished. So obeying is very important. So next stage is individualism and exchange. At the stage of moral development, children account for individual points of view and judge actions based on how they serve individual needs. So in this stage, the children will have their own point of view. They'll judge actions based on how they serve individual needs. In the Haynes dilemma, children argued that the best course of action was the best choice, the best served hence needs. Reciprocity is possible at this point in moral development, but only if it serves one's own interest. So next level is conventional morality. Okay, in this level, the stages interpersonal relationship and maintaining social order. So in interpersonal relationship, it is often referred as good boy, good girl, that kind of orientation. So this stage of moral development is mainly focused upon living up to social expectations and rules. Whatever the society is expecting or whatever roles is expected, we are focused mainly upon that and we are living. So there is an emphasis on conformity, being nice, and consideration of how choices influence relationships. So that is about interpersonal relationships. So next is maintaining social order. So at the stage of moral development, people begin to consider society as a whole when making judgments. So the focus is on maintaining law and order by following the rules, doing one's duty, and respecting the authority. Now comes the level 3, that is post conventional morality. And in this also we have two stages, that is social contract and individual rights and universal principles. So let's see what is social contract and individual rights. So in this stage, people begin to account for differing values, opinions, and beliefs of other people. So rules of law are important for maintaining a society, but members of the society should agree upon these standards. So this is mainly about rules, following the rules, maintaining the rules of society, all those things. And then next is universal principles. So according to Kohlberg's this is the final level of moral reasoning, and it is based upon universal ethical principles and abstract reasoning. So at this stage, people will follow these internalized principles of justice even if they conflict with the laws. So this is next we are moving on to. So the till now we were dealing with the personality theories which was said by different psychologists like Jean Piaget. Then we had Freud. Freud talked about the psychosexual, and he also talked about the components of personality. Then we have Erikson. Then the last we had Kohlberg's moral development theory. And next we are moving to the clusters. So mainly I told you we are dealing with personality disorders. So personality disorders are classified into clusters. So we have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. So in cluster A, we have disorders like paranoid, schizoid. So paranoid and schizoid, their characteristics include paranoid, mistrusting, suspicious, cognitive distortions, negative, misunderstanding. So cluster B includes mainly extroverted or unstable kind of characteristics, emotional dysregulation, impulsivity, unpredictability. Okay. Now next cluster C. In cluster C, it is mainly dealing with anxious or withdrawn kind of behavior, shy, passive, avoids confrontation, and over control. So cluster C is often coexistent with cluster A and B, protective against abusiveness when independent varies only. Okay. So let's see each clusters. So before that, we'll see epidemiological facts. Okay. So according to the race, sex, how it is, how the personality disorders are. Let's see. So race. So no differences in prevalence across the races have been noted. Okay, and in case of sex, let's see how it is. Cluster A, so it is mainly a schizoid personality disorder. It is slightly more common in males than in females. Okay, and in cluster B, antisocial personality is three times more prevalent in men than in women, of course. And borderline personality, it is three times more common in women than in men. And of patients with narcissistic personality, 50 to 70% are male. So mostly personality disorders are seen in male. And cluster C, obsessive compulsive personality disorders diagnosed twice as often in men than in women. And age, according to age, personality disorders generally should not be diagnosed in children and adolescents because personality development is not complete and symptomatic traits may not persist into adulthood. Therefore, the rule of thumb is that personality diagnosis cannot be made until the person is at least 18 years of age. At least the person should be 18 years of age, then only we can diagnose the person as personality, any kind of personality disorder the person is having. Because the criteria for diagnosing the personality disorders are closely related to behaviors of young and middle adulthood. Next, we'll see about the mortality and morbidity. So, risk of death. It is usually related to conditions of or behaviors resulting from the disorder, such as suicide, substance abuse, or injuries from motor vehicle accidents and fighting. Next, we'll see risk factors. What are the risk factors? Nobody actually knows what causes personality disorders. So there is no particular cause, like we do not know how personality disorders are caused, why it is happening. So as we born this way, or do we learn to become this way? Chances are it's going to be a little bit of both. So thus risk factors are more likely the predisposing factors of personality disorders. It can be innate temperamental difficulties, adverse environmental events, or personality disorders in parents. Okay? So something we learn from parents, we watch them react to things. That's how we become as well. Then low socioeconomic statuses, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse during childhood, neglect during childhood, an unstable or chaotic family life during childhood, being diagnosed with childhood conduct disorder, loss of parents through death or traumatic divorce during childhood. So all this can also be a risk factor for getting personality disorders. So personality disorders often begin in childhood and last throughout the adulthood. These reluctance to diagnose personality disorders in a child, who because the patterns of behavior and thinking could simply reflect adolescent experimentation or temporary. Next, we'll see the etiology. Etiology is also not clearly known, but several studies and theories concerning the etiology it includes personality disorders are thought to result from a bad interface, so to speak, between a child's temperament and character on one hand and his or her family environment on the other hand. So etiology is also not clear. So, but it says that it is a result from how between a child's temperament and character or the his or her family environment. Okay, all these are dependent. Next, we'll see personality disorders are thought to be caused by a combination of genetic and environmental influences. Yes, so personality disorders also can be caused due to genetic or environmental factors. You may have a genetic vulnerability to developing a personality disorder, or your life situation may trigger the actual development of a personality disorder. Like in the past, some believed that people with personality disorders were just lazy or even evil. But new research has begun to explore such potential causes as genetics, parenting, and peer influences. So before and all, people thought that those people who are having the personality disorders were they are lazy or even evil. But then now new researchers have come up to explore all these things. So it can influences genetic, psychological, social. And now first one is etiology is about genetic. So researchers are beginning to identify some possible genetic factors behind personality disorders. Some have been able to identify a malfunctioning gene that may be a factor of obsessive compulsive disorder. So some researchers have said that they have identified a malfunctioning gene. So that can be a factor for developing obsessive compulsive disorder in person. While others are exploring genetic links to aggression, anxiety, and fear, traits that can play in the role of personality disorders. So that is about genetic. Now let's see what are the psychological factors. High reactivity, like for example, sensitivity to light, noise, texture, and another stimuli may also play a role. Overly sensitive children who have what researchers call high reactivity are more likely to develop shy, timid, or anxious personality. So this is what the researchers are saying. So if the child is more sensitive, so the child will become shy, timid, or he or she will have anxious kind of personality. However, high reactivity's role is still far from clear cut. 20% of infants are highly reactive, but less than 10% go on to develop social phobias. So, according to them, 20% of infants are highly reactive, only less than 10% only become, only they only develop social phobias. So, next is about social. Verbal abuse. Even verbal abuse can have an impact on the personality. So, a study was conducted on 793 mothers and children. So, the researchers asked mothers if they had screamed at their children or told them they didn't love them or threatened to send them away. So, children who had experienced such verbal abuse were three times as likely as other children to have borderline, narcissistic, obsessive compulsive, paranoid personality disorders in adulthood. So those parents who have screamed or shouted at their children, or who have told that we don't love you, we don't care you, or whether they have threatened, all this verbal abuses. So children who have got experienced such verbal abuses, they are three times more likely to get personality disorders like borderline, narcissistic, obsessive compulsive personality disorders in their adulthood. Next is regarding peers. So, certain factors can help prevent children from developing personality disorders. Even a single strong relationship with a relative, teacher, or friend can offset negative influences. Next is social. Childhood traumas. So, finding from one of the largest studies of personality disorders, it offers clues about the role of childhood experiences. One study found a link between the number and type of childhood traumas and the development of personality disorders. People with borderline personality disorder, for example, had especially high rates of childhood sexual trauma. Okay, so for people who had who were having borderline personality, they had high rates of childhood sexual traumas. They had experienced sexual traumas, and this also justifies the prevalence of borderline personality disorder among females. So, other factors that have been cited as affecting children's personality development are the mass media, social or group hysteria. So, cases of so called mass sociogenic illness have been identified in which a group of children began to vomit or have other physical symptoms brought on in response to an imaginary threat. So, in both the cases, the children were reacting to the suggestion that toxic fumes were spreading through their school. Some authors believe that overly frequent or age inappropriate discussions of terrorist attacks may make children more susceptible, as well as other distortions of personality. So that is about etiology. So next we will see pathogenesis. So abnormalities may be seen in the frontal, temporal, and parietal lobes. So these abnormalities may be caused by perinatal injury, encephalitis, or traumas or genetics. So personality disorders are also seen with diminished monoamine oxidase and serotonin levels. So this is basically they're saying how the personality disorders may be developed. So relationships of anatomy, receptors, and the neurotransmitters to personality disorders are purely speculative to at this point. Okay. So frequently a history of psychiatric disorders is present, developmental abnormalities secondary to secondary to abuse or incest may be present. So the five-factor model has been used to describe the different accepted types of personality disorders. So this is not much important, but then you can just, it's just for your information I have added. So you can just go through this. So most current research suggests that personality disorders may be differentiated by their interactions among the five dimensions rather than differences on any single dimension. So, in general, patients with personality disorders have wide ranging problems in social relationships and mood regulations. So, in general, we can say that persons who have personality disorders, they have problems in dealing with their relationships and also their mood regulations. So these problems have usually been present throughout their adult life. These patients' patterns of perception, thought, and responses are fixed and inflexible. Also, their behavior is often unpredictable. These patterns markedly deviate from their specific culture's expectations. So, to meet the DSM-4 threshold for clinical diagnosis, the pattern must result in clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So in DSM-4, we have different criteria for diagnosing particular personality disorder. So in that, the person must be clinically, the person must should feel the distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. So next is pathophysiology. The origin of personality disorders is a matter of considerable controversy. So we don't know what is the origin of personality disorders. So the traditional thinking holds that these maladaptive patterns are the result of dysfunctional early environments that prevent the evolution of adaptive patterns of perception, response, and defense. A body of data points towards genetic and psychobiologic contributions to the symptomology of these disorders. However, the inconsistency of the data prevents authorities from drawing definite conclusions. So this is just for your information I have added. This is not that much important. So you can, so the important part is mainly what is personality and the theories, what different psychologists said about personality. The theories is very important. So in the next video I'll be dealing with the clinical features, cluster A, cluster B, cluster C, and those criterias and the treatment. So I'll be dealing with all this in the coming videos. So if you find this session is informative, please do like my video, and do not forget to subscribe, and thank you for watching.